Welcome, everybody. Today's session is called Rowing in the Same Direction, Communications to Drive Team Alignment. Communication is a critical management tool that is too often underused, misused, and considering the challenges when done poorly, you have misunderstandings, incorrect assumptions, disengaged employees, mistrust, resistance to change, the list goes on. And the business impacts are very real. Poor communications puts the brakes on growth, reduces productivity, and has a negative impact on your culture. So today we have a Randall Craig here to talk about how to use communications more effectively to align your team from C-suite, frontline, all the way through the hierarchy. For those who don't yet know Randall, he has founded several successful startups. He's held a long-time position at a Big Four consulting firm. He was a senior executive at an American public company, the author of 8 books in the Speaker Hall of Fame, master facilitator. He works with me at the Brain Trust Professional Institute, where we do business growth coaching, executive leadership retreats, and facilitate conversations to align teams. So for those who joined us before, you know the routine. We'll start with some ideas from Randall, then we'll flip into Q&A from you. So Randall, help us fill in some potential blind spots we may have. When it comes to internal communications, what is needed to power a well-run organization?
I think it's a very interesting question, and that's why we actually did this particular session. If you've got an executive director, they might know an awful lot about, say, finance or accounting. They might know an awful lot about the technical area. The CEO understands I don't know, whatever it is that they're doing, but the actual function of communication is actually something that requires skill. It's not something that, gee, because I speak, I'm a speaker. Gee, because I've got a team, therefore I'm a manager. Yes, but are you a great manager? Are you a great communicator? And it's not just a question of, gee, how do we make sure that everybody actually understands and buys into the words that come out of your mouth, but it's a question also of how, as an organization, you structure the communication so that literally, and this goes to our title, everyone is rowing in the same direction. So, I've got a whole bunch of notes. I can talk about this for an hour and a half, 2 hours. But I'd love to go into questions right off the top and see about answering what's important to everybody here on the Zoom call.
Right? How can we measure if our communications are healthy enough or if they need a rethink? Like, how would you help a client figure out if they're communicating too much, not enough, communicating the wrong things, the wrong tone? Like, what would the symptoms be on the team of different extremes?
So I think, in the large organizations, you've got tools like employee surveys, you've got tools like performance appraisal, where you can have certain kinds of conversation, and the surveys certainly you could see at a macro level what people actually like. But I think sometimes it's very hard to think about people as generic because different people in different roles at different times of the financial cycle, the event cycle, whatever it is, have different information needs and where they get the information from and how they're ready to receive it, if you will, let alone change attitude or change behavior or become motivated or ensure that they're complying or whatever it happens to be is different. So let me generalize that a little bit and answer the question, how do we identify the broken link? Where do we see actually that dysfunction? Obviously, if trust goes down, employee surveys, or all of a sudden you've got an employee who's um, insubordinate or misbehaving or difficult. That's an obvious one. But here's a bunch of other ones. If you see the level of politicking going up, if people start to fill in the blanks with what they think, almost like a divining rod, they sort of say, well, I think if I put together all these little pieces, I think I could figure out what the direction is. So when people try and fill in the blanks. Another one is when informal networks and communication mechanisms spring up. I remember in one particular situation, oh my God, this is around oh, gee, maybe around 15, 18 years ago or so, a large organization, they did not have a great internal communication strategy, employee communication strategy. And one person had started up an internal blog. And every day they did a post, if you will, and they had literally thousands of people watching and listening to what this person was saying. And the person, by the way, was a like a frontline clerk in an accounting department, not somebody who was kind of privy to what the strategy really was. But on the other hand, they developed a lot of credibility. Then all of a sudden, the organization was faced with the challenge of, well, how do we go about not just making sure that we've got the proper messaging, getting to the right people at the right time, et cetera, but how do we sort of unwind this informal communications mechanism that sprung up? And it wasn't done well. Okay, I can tell you that. They didn't spend any time co-opting. They didn't spend any time figuring out how to go about winding it down. It was just something that happened in a very, very abrupt way. And all this person's readers, if you will, knew was that so and so suddenly was no longer doing this, which of course involved a great deal of dysfunction and phone calls and emails and so on. So, petitions, it was just very messy. So that's probably a bit of an extreme example, but there's a lot of other ways as well. Here's another way. When external sources become the go-to for internal people. In some organizations, for example, there's a non-affiliated discussion group, maybe on LinkedIn, or maybe it's a private Facebook group. Maybe it's a discussion group. Maybe it's wherever it happens to be. And then all of a sudden that becomes the communications mechanism for people internally to find out about the organization. Also incredibly dysfunctional. And of course that sort of speaks to how do you go about sort of, you know, either co-opting and then taking over or shutting down that external mechanism, if you will. And the short answer to that is you got to actually do your day job of making sure the communication strategy internally is so good that people don't need or to go outside. They see this as secondhand or not true or a waste or whatever it is. So the squeeze out strategy in that. So I think those are probably the biggest kinds of things. I think also just from a particular manager perspective, when your team member says, "I don't know," okay, and then fill in the blank, right? They don't know the strategy. They don't know how what they do every day makes a difference to either the smaller team's effectiveness or where they fit into the business of the big organization, right? So if there's a lot of questions about I'm I don't know where I fit, right? I don't know what's going on. Um, and unfortunately, just in the same way that a senior executive, not everyone is trained in communications or is comfortable in that kind of function. Also, individual managers don't have that particular skill. Not all of them. No, obviously, they wouldn't be promoted to managers, we hope, unless they're actually good at managing. Um, but the skill of communication is also something that everyone can do so long as they've got a certain degree of training, right? And so long as they were their managers before them modeled what good communication is about too. So it's a very complex question. Thank you.
In Managing by Values, author Ken Blanchard and Michael O'Connor write, communication happens naturally when you make the work environment safe. So we've all heard about psychological safety, and you mentioned trust before. Fine, fair, it makes perfect sense. But feet on the ground, people are people, people are imperfect, people, have shared memories of their colleagues where people were not nice to them, whatever you want to describe it. And we do have to sort of grow around and fill the space around our colleagues. So how do we create that feeling of safety and this idea that it just flows smoothly when we are dealing with imperfect people and people reacting to stress all around us?
I think one of the greatest failings of the HR function over the years is that it sort of became in the early days a very all-encompassing require let's groom people, let's see about succession planning throughout the organization, let's see about mentorship, let's see about training and learning and development, let's see about a robust training so that and then all of a sudden the pendulum swings all the way to the other side where it's very transactional. Let's make sure that HRIS system is up, and let's make sure payroll is up, and let's work with these two or three external recruiters and make sure and it became very, very transactional. And the whole question of where does management training come about? So that we can actually help coach, mentor people up to a level where we're not just always dealing with, say, dysfunction, and that makes communications better. So that's one sort of part of the question. The other question is what's the mechanism of communications when it is a one-on-one kind of situation? Is it, for example, one where it's an authoritarian kind of command and control conversation, or is it one that's coaching? Ronnie and I led a retreat um, a number of months ago, and the question was, how do you actually become a more coaching leader with the types of questions that you ask, as opposed to saying, do this by this date in this way, which, by the way, doesn't harvest obviously the capabilities of the individual. But I think flipping into that coaching mode of communication rather than an authoritarian command and control is also part of the answer to your question. I also think that the third part is more structural. So, for example, the one-on-one communication is just one part of the communications mix. How about, for example, to a defined group? How about, for example, all hands? How about for the CEO or executive director themselves, that their very specific role? And by the way, how about external sources that people actually end up relying on as so-called objective knowledge about what the organization's all about? Press releases or social media posts or conferences and what people are saying about the organization and conferences and so on and so forth, right? So the question is, what's the structure that actually an organization puts in place to make sure that the internal communication plan, which, by the way, is not owned by the internal communications group or the communications person. Okay, it parts of it may be, but parts are owned by the leader, the person who sits in the corner office. Some are owned by the senior leadership team. Some are owned by business heads. Some are, excuse me, outsourced to trainers, or in our case, retreat facilitators, etc. And some are the one-on-one or small group conversations that a manager is expected to have and hopefully is having. So does the organization have that structure? We've been in situations where a CEO of a large organization, actually, who's incredibly competent, in her particular case, did not feel comfortable doing all hands meetings or town halls, right? This is the kind of thing in the case, and every leader has got their own desires and comfort levels and everything like that. The solution to that is to say, well, you know what? Maybe it could be done in a tag team format. Maybe she or he, the CEO, can introduce and somebody else can take the questions. Maybe video, not just live. Maybe there's other ways of doing it, using Slack or Teams or some other kind of mechanism. Maybe it's not all hands, but it's a group of hands, a group of hands, a group of hands. So it's not the large group, but at least that way you get across. So you name any of the particular internal communications challenges. Okay, there's, as long as you got the structure in place, and every organization is different, right? So I think it's different.
Angela, you have a question? We'd love to hear.
Yeah, I have a challenge finding the balance. We're a staff of about 16. And when we have an all hand, having all hands versus a specific group, I feel like inevitably when we have a specific group, we leave somebody out. But if we do all hands, then we're wasting some people's time. It's hard to find that balance of when is it right to do that, and how do you get the right people at the table?
Yeah, and there's some very pat answers I can give you on that one, I mean, but I don't think I don't think that um a general answer does justice to the very specifics of your situation. So let me give you a couple maybe out of the box ideas. It could very well be that everybody's invited and it's recorded, but it's not mandatory for everyone to be there. It could very well be that some people are mandatory and some people are voluntary. Okay, it could be, for example, that part of the all hands meeting, particularly if you've got a group of your size, 16, it could very well be that really what it is, it shouldn't be an all hands meeting. Maybe what it should be is something that has a training or upskilling component for the core group, called 6 people. I don't know what the number is, right? Where it's not just the leader sort of sharing that vision and everything like that, but there's also some upskilling of the group so that they're more capable of developing that exceptionally strong alignment, right? And then there's this waterfall down into everybody else. It could very well be that instead of doing the big all hands meeting once a quarter, once a month, whatever it happens to be, maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe it's a bigger thing once a year. For example, if you've got an annual conference and you've got most of the team there, maybe you take some time afterwards and you facilitate through and use that as a planning mechanism, separate from your board and separate from all the other volunteers, et cetera, but as a staff group, right? Because almost everybody's there anyway. Maybe it's a question of saying, we're going to here's an interesting one. You always want to invest in your people with training, right? So maybe what you do is you say, instead of having higgledy-piggledy, one trainer with one message here, one trainer with another message there, another trainer with another message there, another one who does webinars, but they do their own little thing. And so all of a sudden, everyone's getting lots of training, but there's no alignment in terms of the messaging, right? Maybe what you do is you say, okay, listen, we're digging deep with one particular one, that every time they work with us, they learn more about us and where our vision is. So that comes in. So it's not a little high level-y kind of customization, but it's stuff that's actually more and more relevant as the time goes by. Angela, hint, hint. Call Rodney or I, and we actually do that kind of thing. But the idea is to say, listen, if we want to get a common message, we want to get alignment, if we want to build a common vocabulary with everybody, right? It's good to take a look at what you're already doing and saying, maybe if we just make a couple little tweaks, it becomes a little bit easier to get that. And then it suddenly becomes, okay, I don't need to solve that town hall, everybody there, but some people are not necessarily. That suddenly becomes a little less important. Okay. The other idea, let me just ask you, Angela, is everyone local or remote in your case?
We're all, except for one, local and mostly work in the office with a few remote days.
So one of the ideas is to say, maybe what we can do is we could take the all hands meeting and we could slice it up into 10-minute chunks. So if you've got the concept of a stand-up meeting at the beginning of every day, where everyone talks about what their challenges are and what they hope to accomplish that day, that kind of thing, maybe what you do is you take 5, 7 minutes just then, bang, bang, and that's where some knowledge, um, an opportunity to ask questions can take place as a bit of an add-on. And so it's no longer, gee, we're relying just on that. I still think you need to do that at some point. But I guess my point is this: if you think about what the constellation of communications opportunities you are, like, gee, we've got what is it, Ronnie? We've got 45 different communications mechanisms and vehicles that categories, I should say, to improve communication in a group, right? Every organization, everyone is different history, different past, different people, different strategy, the whole bit. So something in there. And by the way, it's an interesting thing. If we have a particular thing that's working relatively well, it's fine. And it's fine. My question is fine good enough? Is there a way, just by changing the communication strategy, even though it's working fine, changing the communication strategy might just doing the change actually have an impact? Gee, we've always done the weekly production meeting or the weekly planning meeting. Okay, now we're going to do daily this and biweekly that. Well, gee, something, we've never done town halls before. We're going to do those once a month. Okay, come with your questions, and we're going to come with whatever it is that's important, right? Gee, let's do Ask Me Anything sessions. Okay, it's a little bit different, large organizations versus smaller versus super small, but there's all these different ways of sometimes what was excellent and what worked before was just kind of average, kind of fine. Fine isn't another term for excellence, by the way, right? So there's a way to take a look at it.
I have a couple of ideas if I could share.
Sure, of course.
Angela, I relate to what you're saying a lot. We've seen this before. When I hear you say, enough people need to be there to address the agenda, but some people are left off, they're going to be feel left out of the main group is there. Maybe it would help you to, if your agenda would be more focused. Maybe right now you have too many topics on the agenda that require too many groups to come in, and then they're going to miss. Whereas if you had shorter meetings, quickie meetings, just with certain departments, nobody has to feel like left out of the trip, to the boardroom. And the issue described we had with a team that was growing, and there was a core group, and everyone's job descriptions were growing, but they still were used to meeting together and used to making decisions together. But they kind of needed to each mind their own business to properly grow the company and stay focused. We came in, we did a whole unit on decision making and how the team can make decisions. And there were so many aha moments, and we empowered everybody sort of like stay in their own lane, do your job, like be the hero of your own department. People stopped being jealous of being in the meeting and could do their own job. But this was great because we alleviated the stress the leader had. They didn't want to break up the band, break up the original members of the group. So we came in and did that training, and it like sorted itself out. So it's a great example Randall said about like getting everyone getting the same message and like things fall into place.
I would say at that particular segment that we did, that decision making was one of them. The other one was all about collaboration,
Yeah.
right? So threading the needle on stay in your lane and get that job done because that's what you're being held accountable for. And here's the decision-making model that works so everybody knows where they play. At the same time, like, an hour or two earlier, about this is how we work better together, right? And so it's a very funny thing because we don't want to have people living in islands, right? It's all about collaboration these days, right? So I love it. I love it. Go
What
ahead.
you shared here reminds me of the other session we did about designing your professional development program, and how one of the participants had this aha moment and said it's like wine and cheese, like you don't just have one training, you have to like pair it together. So that was a very good example, Randall. Like when we do a retreat with a team, we can't just solve one problem because then there's stress in other departments. So you have to sort of pair it nicely. Randall, you're going to
Yeah.
say something?
Well, I was just going to say, I like to have not wine and cheese. I think crackers kind of work pretty well
Yeah,
too.
that's the third topic we have to do. I got my next question. Angela, great question. Thank you for asking. Very, very well relevant. Okay. Randall, several of the large clients we have worked with, and we do see this, in industry, that the org chart absent is the seat of internal comms. It's not there. These companies can have dozens, hundreds of employees. Like, how does this get overlooked? And I think that's maybe why they have communication issues, right? They think it's the CEO, they think it's supposed to be like, who's supposed to do it? How is this absent?
Well, does this sound familiar? Okay. Well, communications is really an HR function. So we'll have somebody in HR put together the newsletter, and they're going to be doing the newsletter. Okay. Another organization. Well, marketing is really in charge of the brand, and to be strong on the outside, you got to be strong on the inside. So we're going to have marketing responsible for internal communications. Then you've got, well, you know what? We've got a writer that works on proposals. Maybe they could put together a newsletter. Okay, an online newsletter. Oh, you know what? We've got a very strong IT department, and they put out our intranet. And so they can do, and it doesn't matter where, but there's a lot of growth that is where there's momentum, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a place. And what's missing, and some of you might resonate with us very highly, is the question of who's responsible for strategically putting together the internal communications strategy as a whole, right? Who's responsible to make sure that all these little threads are woven together in a way where there's some consistency, right? So all of a sudden, the organization grows to a point where they say, this is important. And by the way, before then, what they'll say is maybe we can get somebody who's a fractional communications person who can, help us along the way, and eventually we'll get a full-time person, etc. That's kind of the way it should go. But as soon as we've got somebody doing the internal communications function, then all of a sudden there's a bit of a, particularly if they're fractional, there's a bit of a tug of war because, well, this writer likes to do it. Well, the IT department likes to do it. Well, marketing, well, they don't really want to give it away. And well, the CEO, they're a communications person and they want to do it, right? And so it requires a lot of I don't know if the word is internal moral suasion. There has to be alignment with respect to what the messaging is. The concept of actually deciding messaging is actually something that is a surprise sometimes for some management teams. Why can't we just say this is what we want? Well, why don't we think about what the outcome is that you want? And then we could think about what the message can be and what the channels are and what the different types of groups within the organization, and by the way, external as well for that matter, because some of the stuff that's internal finds its way outside. We could think holistically about what that actually is. And then we can say, okay, now you over there are responsible for this. You over there are responsible for this. We'll take this part because that's what we're skilled in. And gee, CEO, we need you to do such and such. And so and so agency outside, we need you to do such and such. And let's just make sure that whoever you've got to do training or running retreats or coaching, etc., is on the same page as well, because that's a very, very strong way of reinforcing some of the communications goals and messages, right? And let's find a way to make sure that the communications person and the person who's doing the communication strategy is not sitting on an island, disconnected from the business. Because if you want to get the most effective use out of that particular role, they need to be wired in. They need a seat at the table, right? And if they've got a seat at the table, amazing things can happen. Amazing things can happen. We had a client a number of years ago where the head of communications, who was responsible, by the way, for external as well as internal, had a seat at the table. It was a public sector. It was a major school board, actually. And the things that this organization was able to do were just unbelievable in terms of reaching out to all the different stakeholders internally and externally. And it was a very large school board in this particular case. All of a sudden, that person retired, left. And they put somebody in who was very competent. I liked them very much, but they didn't have a seat at the table. And the new head of the organization did not sort of let that person, in on what's happening and wasn't able to therefore take advantage of any advice and perspective from a messaging and communications or strategy perspective. And of course, there was momentum from before, but this is the kind of thing where I see a little bit of a lost opportunity, right? They may not be on the senior executive team in the largest organizations, but they've got to be pretty close. They've got to be pretty close.
With that, we're going to break right here. This part one on internal communications. We'll pick up with more Q&A in part two. And if any of the issues we talked about so far resonate with you, if you're curious about upskilling and bringing professional development to your team, if you're curious about planning your next corporate retreat, leadership retreat, or business coaching, we'd be happy to help you, share resources, point you in the right direction. Do email us at info@randallcraig.com or book a call at www.randallcraig.net/30. And we'll see you back for part two.